additional camera angles, driver stats, and track information. It's available on mobile, tablet, and connected TVs. Download the app and find out more at NBCSports.com/live. While the cars are still waiting to get onto Pocono Raceway, Brad Keselowski was testing earlier this week at Watkins Glen, and we flash back to Tuesday. This was Brad coming down the straightaway, getting ready to take the hard right-hander, and said he had brake issues. We've seen this before, but we haven't ridden along like that. He went from about 90 miles an hour to 0. And that contact was straight into the wall. That's what the car ended up looking like after the fact. Brad Keselowski then addressed the media earlier today and had a little bit more to say about what he thinks needs to be done and maybe what these drivers go through. He told the media this earlier.
There's only so many of those hits you're going to take before someone gets killed. It's just the way it is. I know that. It's not something I'm comfortable with, but I think as a sport, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. At the end of the day, I'm still standing here. Odds are that if 100 people take that hit, 1 or 2 are not going to be standing here anymore. I think that's pretty safe to say. So since half a dozen have taken pretty similar hits in that same part of the racetrack, I would say it begs to reason that maybe a change should be made in that area. But I can't say that I have the specific idea at this time, because more people are going to take that hit, and eventually one of us ain't going to come back. But that's something that the smart guys that work on that stuff are going to have to figure out sometime. We've signed up for a certain level of risk, and that's right on the edge of what's acceptable risk. I think every driver has their own line, and if you're looking at it from that perspective, I think every driver is saying that that's the acceptable risk they've signed up for, and it falls within those parameters.
Jeff, is that the acceptable risk that you as a driver have signed up for?
Well, listen, everybody has their own risk level. There's no doubt about that. And what I like about Brad is that he's willing to express himself. He isn't afraid to talk about a subject that is controversial, so to speak. I think that's what our sport needs people like that are willing to express themselves. That is a problematic corner. I mean, it just is. I mean, it is almost a 90-degree when you're going down the straightaway and looking at the face of a wall. That has potential for problems. So we've seen the same wreck many, many times. So to ignore it and act like it's not a problem, it wouldn't be right. Now, I will say this. They haven't ignored it. Watkins Glen has done a lot of work. This is Jimmy Johnson in 2000. You can see he goes through the foam barriers. I mean, just blows through the foam barriers, hits the wall right here in the gravel pit. I'm not sure that any of that slowed him down much. But he did. But I mean, he walked out. Yep. I mean, he walked out. So then this is Denny Hamlin in 2011, another big impact. They're all head-on impacts, and that's the thing that's scary. And that's what has to be addressed. Here's another one. Now this one I think is really interesting, and I think we should study, because look how the tire barrier slows the car down before it gets to the wall. So I think there's something to be said about that. I think that we should, that NASCAR and the racetracks and everybody should look at maybe building a series of walls that you go through before you hit the wall, in tire barriers or whatever. So those tire barriers, without a doubt, slow that race car down and shorten and lengthen the amount of time that the driver felt the impact. That's the key in these wrecks, Steve, is that when you wreck, you want to spread that load out over the longest amount of time possible, and that's what the safer barriers do. That's what all those things do, is spread that load out. So, listen, I applaud Brad for saying this is a problem. It needs to be addressed, and there needs to be continued effort to it. But again, I will tell you that Watkins Glen has spent a tremendous amount of time, effort, and energy changing the racetrack to try to make it better. But we can't, nobody can just sit still and say it's good enough.
Well, there are uncomfortable comments, and I think that's what's needed in sports. That's how the bar gets moved, especially on the safety side. I think you have to have someone speak up. We've had veteran drivers in the past speak up. Brad has taken this role on. He took the hit. He was in the accident. He has every right to say it. But when you look at Watkins Glen International, I think the road courses are the most difficult tracks to safely design and safely change the walls, because this is Watkins Glen. This right here is the front stretch. This is turn 1, and this is going up through the S's. So Brad Keselowski was coming down this front stretch right here, lost his brake, and hit 90 degrees into that wall right there. So the issue is really not the speed the cars are traveling. The cars are safe as can be. We talk about walls and angle of impact, and you just see how difficult this is. There's a front stretch wall, and then there's a turn. Well, now you come to Pocono. Well, look at the tire tracks you have. When a car crashes going into this corner, it hits this wall, glances off, and goes that direction. So when you talk about dissipating energy, Jeff, that's what can happen. At Watkins Glen, it doesn't dissipate any energy. You hit it 90 degrees, the car comes to a stop almost immediately. So I think someone much smarter than me with track design will look at it, though, and make changes. And I want to say, Watkins Glen has had this issue in the past, and they have changed it. Remember, there didn't used to be a bus stop, and there were some very bad accidents going to the carousel. And then just out of
bad accidents.
Yeah, turn 1. This is coming out of turn 1, the accident turn 1. And look at this accident. Off this wall, catches David Rudiman. He hits another wall. Both angles of impact, very, very severe. You see, once again, bad angle, and then look at this angle, almost 90 degrees. You see how severe that is. So, Jeff, they made changes to the racetrack for this.
Yeah, they did. And part of the problem is that you've got to have a place for rescue personnel to access the racetrack.
Right.
So if you didn't have access holes, then that's a problem. But you can see what they did when they made the changes. They changed where the rescue personnel can get to you. They changed the angle of the walls
In here.
all in that area. That angle is different. That angle is different. So you still have access points and egress points, whereas they are very vital. I mean, you have to have them. Imagine a car on fire and a safety personnel had to come from turn 1 to get all the way to the inner loop. I mean, you can't have that. They have to have a way to get on the racetrack, but that creates issues. So the racetrack has worked hard, but they have to continue. Listen, I've said it for a long time. Safety is not a goal you're ever going to reach. The target moves. It moves all the time. You have to stay proactive. You have to work nonstop. You can't ignore stuff. You can't say, "Hey, that happened. It'll never happen again." And listen, this sport has become very, very proactive. I mean, I will defend the sport, but at the same time, that wall and that point of impact has to be looked at to make sure that everything is being. And listen, I know that they did everything they thought they could do because there's been a lot of effort,
Right.
but it needs to be revisited.
This sport will always be dangerous. There will always be an element of danger. And we want to go down to Marty Snyder. Again, we're under a little bit of a break here. They were supposed to be on track, but they're cleaning the track, trying to make sure it's ready for practice to go. So that's why there's a little bit of a delay to the start of this, and we'll go down to Marty.
Working on a couple of weepers on the racetrack. I got to talk to Brad Keselowski before he climbed in the race car, and no doubt Watkins Glen has done things to improve their racetrack. No doubt what these drivers do, as you mentioned, Rick, certainly very dangerous. Brad said that was one of the hardest hits he's ever taken in his life, and I asked him, do you feel like that's one of the most dangerous corners in all of NASCAR? He said it certainly ranks up there. Anytime you're going downhill into a 90-degree turn, it's going to be a very bad hit when you do hit. He said what worries him is what we've talked about, the repeatability of accidents that seem to happen in turn 1 at Watkins Glen. But the problem is, and Brad told me, I don't know what to do to change it. What can you do? Shorten the corner, make it a longer runoff area like you have a little bit at Sonoma when they run Indy cars there. He said, I don't know the solution, and that's the biggest issue. The way the racetrack is designed, as you talked about, Steve, we're going to need smarter people than us to figure that out. But something needs to be done, in Brad's opinion, to make that corner safer because he is worried about the future of that corner. And the team told me that car was beyond destroyed. So obviously that will not be back for the Watkins Glen race next week. But Brad Keselowski clearly concerned about turn 1 at Watkins Glen. But as you pointed out, Steve, what do you do? How do you make changes to a racetrack like that when the corner is so critical on that racetrack?
Well, the one thing I will do is I will say every time that changes are made in NASCAR that I either didn't understand or question why they did it, NASCAR has always been very open to bring me into the truck or into a meeting with the team they put together to make the changes. And if this isn't going to be one person, I would hope they would bring the drivers in, understand, but they're also going to bring in engineers, different groups. One thing NASCAR has done is not been shy, Jeff, to reach outside of their comfort zone to go find, whether it's a university or an engineering group or someone to help them with a situation.
And that's what has to happen.
Absolutely.
You cannot do it. You cannot put it on NASCAR alone. You can't put it on a team alone. You can't put it on. It's everybody. The tracks, the teams, the sponsors, the manufacturers, NASCAR. everybody working to use the tools that are available. I mean, there's so many tools that are available, and that's how you solve problems. You don't do it by yourself. You do it with a lot of help from a lot of entities.
There are a lot of smart people that are involved in this sports. And again, going back to Watkins Glen next week, not only are they talking about that turn one, but a repave will come into play as well.